In this video, I'll be trying out some different vintage Olympus OM lenses adapted to my Sony camera. You might be wondering why you'd want to be using an old vintage lens on a brand new modern camera. Well, the thing is, there's two reasons for me. One is the price, and two is the image quality you get from it. Lots of these older SLR lenses can produce images that are just as good as some of the stuff that's on the market these days. If I didn't tell you that the images throughout this video were shot on 30-plus-year-old glass, you probably would have thought that they're from pretty recent camera lenses. This is going to be an ongoing series on my channel where I adapt different vintage lenses to modern cameras and see how the images look. In this first adapting vintage lens video, I'm going to be looking at 3 lenses, all from the OM Zuikos system. The first one being the 28mm f2.8, also the 50 1.8, and the zoom lens, which is a 35-70 3.5 to 4.5 variable aperture. In 2019, you can get the 28mm f2.8 lens for about 80 bucks used. You can get the 50 1.8 for about $60, and this zoom lens runs you about $60 as well. For about $200, you can get yourself a really nice manual 3-piece lens kit. That's less than most lenses cost. I use these 3 lenses pretty extensively. I was mainly using them on my Bellingham Blue project, which you can check on my website or my Instagram. These lenses are incredibly lightweight. The 28 and the 50 weigh a little under 6 ounces each without an adapter. Adapter weighs anywhere from 2 to 3 ounces depending on which kind you get. And this zoom one weighs little under 7 ounces. So this whole kit is incredibly light, lighter than most lenses you'd have in your bag anyway. I didn't want to be carrying pounds of lenses in my messenger bag, and with a 28, a 50, and a variable 35 to 70, you pretty much cover all the ranges you'd need on a mirrorless camera. With the adapter, the lenses sit slightly larger on your mirrorless camera than they would on an OM SLR. The construction is solid, focusing rings are smooth and have a rigid rubber grip. All have hard stops when changing the aperture, which isn't great for video. All 3 of these lenses have a 49mm front filter thread, which is great if you're trying to keep the weight down in your bag. You just need to bring 1 extra filter and 1 extra lens hood, and you're good to go. You can swap between them all. If your digital camera has in-body stabilization, be sure that you change the settings to the correct focal length to maximize the ability to use slow shutter speeds. Also, since these lenses are completely manual, you may want to turn on a focus peaking setting or have a custom button to punch into zoom to make sure you're getting that part you want sharp. Take advantage of the current features your mirrorless camera has to get the best images you can. Let's take a closer look at each of these lenses, and we're going to start out with the 28mm f2.8. This lens has an aperture range of f2.8 to f22, and it's got a minimum focusing distance of about 12 inches. It's the widest lens in the set with a surprisingly minimal amount of distortion. For an older 28mm, this is incredibly sharp. When shot wide open at 2.8, I did notice some vignetting, not enough to be distracting in an image for me. I think I have been preferring 28mm shots with this over my more modern Tamron 28 to 75 2.8, also being shot at 28 2.8. This Zuikos 28mm has so much character and beautiful color renditions. Here are some of my favorite pictures that I've taken with this 28mm lens. Now let's take a look at the 50mm. It has an aperture range of f1.8 to 16, and the minimum focusing distance is a little less than 1.5 feet. This lens gives you the best bokeh of the bunch. At 1.8, it's a little soft and the contrast isn't the greatest, but when you start stopping it down to, like, say f4, you get more sharpness and more contrast. At 5.6, it seems to be sharp across the whole frame. Here are some of my favorite pictures taken on the 50mm. If I had to rank these three lenses, this one would probably be in third place. From the variable aperture of 3.5 to 4.5 depending on which end of the focal range you're at, only at 70 millimeters with a completely wide aperture will you notice some shallow depth of field, but it's not the greatest. This lens isn't terrible by any means, but I wish it would be a little wider in both the aperture and focal range. But if it was something like a 24 to 70, it would be a lot larger, and if the aperture was bigger too, this lens would probably be pretty heavy and bulky. And that's kind of why I like it, is it's just so small and compact. It's barely any bigger than the 50 millimeter without an adapter. It's ridiculous that this is a 35 to 70 zoom. Since I have the 50 mil 1.8, that kind of covers the really shallow depth of field shots I would want, and the small form factor of this lens is what keeps me interested. At 35 millimeters on this, I noticed some vignetting. This lens has a close focus feature, and on the 70 millimeter end, it is pretty darn handy. I've still been able to get some wonderful images out of this lens. The optics in it are great for an older zoom lens. One of my favorite vintage zoom lenses I've personally tested just because of the size alone. Here's some of my favorite pictures I've taken on the 35 to 70 millimeter. Quick note that if you're adapting these to a crop sensor digital camera like a APS-C or Micro Four Thirds, you need to factor in that these were designed for 35 millimeter full frame. So they will be more zoomed in on those crop censored cameras, have a smaller effective aperture, which means less bokeh, and you will focus a little closer as well. Overall, these three lenses get high recommendation from me. Go pick up a couple online or at your local shops, adapt them to your current cameras, and enjoy the pictures you get from them. Thanks for watching my first adapting vintage lens video. I hope you enjoyed. Next time, we're going to be bringing out this guy.